To continue with 3D rendering, what we want to do is we want to start by adding the sun and the shadows and lights into the scene, and then we'll get to materials. So what we want to do is under our render, okay, we want to go to sun and location, and we want to first turn our sun status on. Okay, so essentially what that does is it turns the sun on in the model. When you do, you'll get a little window that pops up that asks you if you want to turn off your default lighting. I'm going to say yes, okay, and you'll note that it is recommended, so I will click on that. And you should see that your lighting has changed a bit, okay. Before I continue, what I want to do is I want to create a ground plane for my model, okay, because really, you know, in adding lights and everything, you're not going to see the shadows until you do that. So that should, you know, you should make sure that before you get into all of this that you should add a ground plane. So to do that, I'm going to go into my solid menu and I'm going to go to box, and I'm just going to quickly create a box to put underneath my model. And once I set the two corners, what I want to do is now I want to set the z-axis, and I don't want to set it in the positive because you'll see from my model that's going to swallow it up. Okay, so I'm going to bring it underneath, make sure that the grid shows on top, and click. Okay, and if I ever need to adjust it afterwards and make it bigger, I can always select the box and I can stretch it as I need to. Okay, just like what we learned from last week with 3D modeling. Just as a little side note, you'll see that there are two cameras. You note that in the last video we created one camera. One is for that view one, okay, that custom view that we created, and one is actually for the camera view. So if you're a bit confused by that, that's what that means. To go back to this, now what we want to do is, so if we go back to render, you notice that our sun is on. And what we want to do is we want to, first we can decide if we want to turn the sun on, or the sky on. And what that means is that if I orbit, you'll see that the sky in this case is you know, kind of this gray plane and this blue. If I turn the sky background on, what that does is it makes it all this sky background. Okay, and you can use that as the background if you want. It'll render it with that sky background, and then you can also choose the sky background and illumination, meaning that, you know, the information from the sky is also going to be illuminated into your materials too as well, so they'll reflect in that. So you can turn that on, and then what we want to do is we want to set our date and our time. Okay, you have the option to set location, and you'll notice that if you do this, it gives you the option from map and from file. Now, before 2014, this used to be a geographic location where you could pick a place on a map that you would want to choose as your project location. Okay, but now with 2014, what they've switched to is basically using apps for this. Okay, and you'd have to go to your Autodesk 360, you would have to download some apps for this, and you know, it's a little bit of a process. And so as opposed to doing that, I'm just going to continue with this lesson not doing that step, okay? But just keep in mind that you'll have to do that through Autodesk 360, or what you can do is you can use an earlier release and use a geographic location from that, or what you can do is you can actually go to Google Earth, okay? And you can download Google Earth, and you could specify a location in that program, and then what you would do is you would save that file from Google Earth as a KMZ file, and you can upload that from file into 2014. Okay, but what we can do is we can set our date and our time, and you'll see that this is a little bit dark, and that's because our date is set for the fall. Okay, for September 21st, and the time is at 3 p.m. Okay, so, you know, with your experience with the fall time, you know, at 3 p.m., that's when the sun, you know, starts to get a little bit low on the sky. So what we want to do is we can change our date, you know, maybe sometimes, or for a date that's more in the summertime, okay, more in the early mid-afternoon, and you'll see that it brightens up a lot. Now, also with, you know, what we've seen with our view cube is that there is a compass to that. So that does actually indicate where north is located in our model, so that you'll find that when you start to render these things, that you can do accurate sun studies. Okay, so if you're working on a project that it does depend on sun studies, okay, you can basically set the time and the date and render and render and render those times when the sun moves across the sky and how it affects your model. And it does so in a pretty accurate way. So that's a really good feature about this. Now what we want to do is we want to add some lights, okay, because right now we just have the sun illuminating our model. And so, you know, it's a good idea to have some lights too as well. So if I go all the way to the left onto the lights, I can expand this and I can create point lights, spotlights, distant lights, and web lights, okay? And this you'll find, again, is the same, are the same lights that you'll find in other 3D programs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert, usually I insert, you know, a spotlight or, you know, the sunlight, you know, a distant light, you know, and some point lights, okay, or just some point lights. Point lights are basically an ambient light that you can have in within your model. So I'm going to add one of those, okay, so I click on point, and what it does is, like the camera, it attaches that point light to your cursor, okay, so that when I click, it'll insert it, and then I'll hit exit. Okay, you'll see that it's kind of looking a little bit odd, and that's because what it does is it inserts it right into the middle of our ground plane. Okay, so I'm going to click on that, and again, use my grips to show, or to move it, sorry. And it does show, you know, the effects of it when you have your realistic view style on. Okay. So now, if I do a quick render of this, okay, and this is the process that you should go through, okay, these really quick iterations to see how it's going to affect your model. You'll see that it, you know, it has a little bit of a bright spot. Now, the one thing about this draft, you'll notice that I'm drafting it, my render preset is in the draft. It does not show the light as accurate as a presentation. So when you start to work with, you know, your materials and your lights, and you start to model using the presentation preset, it's going to start to look, you know, a bit different than what it would if you were rendering with the draft preset. Okay, so I'm going to just click out of that, and what I can do is I can add some more lights. I can add more point lights as I want. I can add, let's say, a spotlight. Okay, and what this does is it actually attaches what looks like a flashlight onto my cursor. Okay, and I'm going to click on that, and you'll see that, like the camera, it has a target to it. So first I click to insert the spotlight, and then I aim it towards my model, and I click to set the target and hit exit. Okay, and then again with the spotlight, I'm going to take my grips, my move, and you'll see that it has this inner circle is called the hotspot, and this outer one is called the fall off. Okay, the greater that they're away from each other, the more that light is going to be diffused from in between these 2 points. The closer they are together, okay, the more of a really bright spotlight they're going to be. Okay, and you can adjust this here, and you can also adjust it in the properties. Okay, you'll see that it has all of the options for that light once you select that light. Okay, now right now my target's up in the air, so I'm going to move it down, and I'm going to aim it more towards my model. Oops, and this is where your snaps get a little bit tricky. Okay, so I might, you know, depends on what I want to do, I might turn them off, I don't know. But I'm just going to move this into a position where it's going to shine it from above. And, you know, I can do a little quick rendering to see how that shows up. If I don't want to do the whole thing, I can do a render region. Okay, just by clicking on that, going to render region, zooming in, and seeing how that looks right in my screen. Okay, so that's really it when you start to add lights, is that, you know, it's pretty easy to be able to do that. Okay, now what we want to do, and, you know, again, if there's too little, or if you have actual light fixtures that you want to model, you're going to have to be a little bit more specific, you know, about the lights that you put in, the brightness, the intensity, so on and so forth. But, you know, again, it just kind of takes practice, and it's a lot of iterations of taking renderings. Okay, so you'll find that this process does actually take a while. Once you have everything in place, it really takes a lot of time to fine-tune it and tweak it. So that's the same with any other rendering program. It's always going to be really, most of your time is spent in tweaking how the model looks. Now the next step is that we want to start to add our materials. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the materials browser. Okay, you can also type in materials. And AutoCAD actually has a preset of our materials that we can use. Okay, and what happens is that it'll show up looking like a list like this. Okay, and you can change it to be, I prefer the thumbnail view so that I can actually see what they look like. And up here, I'm also going to change that to thumbnail view because that's a little bit easier for me to look at. Okay, you might, again, it's a preference thing, but that for me is the easiest thing to look at. Now what I want to do is I want to start to assign some materials. Okay, what I can do is you'll notice that this home list is closed. Okay, if I click on that, I can go to my Autodesk library and I can expand this. Okay, so all I'm doing is clicking on these arrows in order to expand the list, and you'll see that they actually do separate them out into groups such as ceramics, metals, metallic paints, siding, so on and so forth. And I find that with AutoCAD, they've actually really have developed their materials. So they're actually pretty good. And then once you assign your materials in AutoCAD, if you bring in the model with the assigned material to it, okay, you can actually, bring it into a program like 3D Max, and that material will stay with it. Okay, so you'll find that you don't have to reassign any materials like that. And to assign materials, it's pretty, easy in that I can select my object that I want, okay, to assign my material to, and I can right-click on that material that I want to assign it, and go to Assign Selection. Assign to Selection. Okay, and you'll see that now these materials, okay, are starting to show up in my model under my realistic view style. And you'll see that it also is added to the top here as well.